All right, it is 12 o'clock. Welcome, everybody, to our Friday legislative webinar. I'm Kevin Toon, Communications Director for the League of Oregon Cities. And I want to welcome everybody to our webinar as we wrap up the 17th week of the 2025 legislative session. Before we start, here's some of our usual housekeeping items. First, if you have not yet done so, please make sure your microphone is muted. Second, we will be ending this webinar at 1 o'clock promptly. Also, please update your screen name to include the city you represent. I'll put some instructions in the chat on how to do that. Lots of new information for you today. We'll do our best to get through it quickly so we can take your questions at the end of our presentation from our individual presentations from our lobbyists. Here's a quick overview of what we're going to cover. The bills of the week that we'll be talking about start with an update on a shot clock bill that creates deadlines for the local review of residential engineering plans. We'll get you the latest on the last state economic forecast that was heard by the legislators this week. Last forecast they'll hear before budgeting. We'll also hear about a drone bill, which establishes guidelines for public safety and law enforcement use of drones. Following that, we'll have an update on the transportation package known as TRIP 2025. And finally, an update on an LOC priority, transient lodging tax flexibility. So because of the volume of information that we need to present, we're going to hold all questions until the end of these presentations. If you have a question along the way, please raise your Zoom hand or type your question in the chat feature. Myself and our staff will do our best to make sure we note who raised their hands in what order, and we'll get to those questions in the order received. So let's get underway. And here to take us through each bill, I will turn things over to my colleague, Jim McCauley, LOC Legislative Director. Jim.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us again on Friday. So every day or every week that passes, we get closer to sine die. So that's a good thing. We've got a second chamber deadline coming up at the end of next week. These are always important deadlines and help move us a little bit faster along the way to try to reach some of those targeted deadlines that the legislature has in place. Keep in mind that these deadlines don't really apply to bills that are in Rules Committee, Revenue Committee, Ways and Means, and actually some of the joint committees have a little bit of flexibility as well. And there's always opportunities to actually rename a brand new committee, which is what we'll be doing on the transportation packages that moves forward and all. June 18th is the targeted sine die from the legislature. I don't think they're going to hit that date, but the statutory sine die is June 29th. And so I'm anticipating sometime between those two dates, we'll be closing up shop here. And again, we're getting to pretty close to about 30 days out on that. A couple points I think we always like to bring up on the front end of this call, and probably we'll duplicate it a little bit on the back end, is outreach is always important. It does make a difference. It's helping us hold the line on some of the bills that we've got some significant opposition to, as well as helping with negotiate some final language on other bills as well. Without that involvement, we're not going to be as successful in any kind of legislative process. Yeah, so continuing to have that outreach and maintaining those relationships is incredibly helpful for us. So with that, I'm going to go and start off the conversation here with Senate Bill 974. Alexandra Ring is our lead on all things related to housing and land use, and has been working with several partners around our membership, and has been trying to work on trimming a little bit of the impacts or some of the significant impacts of Senate Bill 974. So Alexandra, it's all yours.
Hi there, folks. For those of you who have not been tracking SB 974, this is a kind of large-scale bill with a number of different provisions. The first is an engineering shot clock, the second being kind of an urban housing land use application, which creates a broader definition of limited land use decisions related to housing, and then some design review provisions. It passed out of the Senate unanimously, and as kind of the base bill, incredibly problematic, including provisions, for engineering fee penalties, if you miss the shot clock, things like that. Incredibly problematic bill, and I don't think we had much hope of changing it. And then it got to the House, and this is kind of a good news, bad news thing. This bill is going to pass the House, but the engineering shot clock, the penalty portion has been removed. It has been changed to 120 days. We do not expect to see significant litigation over the engineering shot clock. What little data we have on how long it's taking your average city to process applications shows that 120 days with mutually agreed upon extensions is probably in line with what it takes for most projects. Maybe not your most complex, but those mutually agreed upon extensions are key. And even if you don't meet the deadline, it is now lined up with the current land use writ, which we do not see large scale, litigation over, mainly because it's cost prohibitive to file those kinds of writs. And your recoup is quite minimal. On the urban housing application, the limited land use decision section, we have yet to see final language, but we are hopeful that is substantially narrowed enough to not be problematic at this juncture. And then regarding design review, the design review section has been narrowed substantially to largely, and there are still some functional things included in that section, but largely just aesthetic standards, and we'll now have a 7-year sunset provision. So in 7 years from July of 2026, that provision of the bill will sunset. And the design review portion, I will also mention, only applies to multifamily, or not multifamily, single family, middle housing, and manufactured housing developments of 20 or more. It does not apply to any kind of smaller infill developments or any multifamily developments. So it's a lot of progress on this one. It's not a win, but it's not a wholesale loss. Huge shout out to all of the cities who have helped us get to this point. It's been a long one. So thank you.
Correct. Thanks very much. And again, when we were working on this thing on the front end, as Alexander and Matt walked through some of the major points, this was going to have a pretty significant impact across the board. The fiscal, I think we came up with on this with just a relatively conservative view of permits, kind of getting penalized and things of that nature, was in the millions. So we've definitely trimmed down those economic impacts and now just deal with kind of just some of the finer points on that design review. Jenna, you are next up with state revenue forecast. As was mentioned on the top of the hour, this is the last revenue forecast before we hit the final stages of the Ways and Means process, where they start making determinations on how much policy bills are going to get funded, agency budgets, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, where are we at with money?
Yeah, so Jim, the forecast was better and worse than we expected in some ways. So I will say that they're looking at less resources for the 2025-2027 biennium budget, about 500 million less to spend than they first anticipated after the March forecast. But that's still up from the end of year forecast. So the legislature has about $39.3 billion in general fund and lottery dollars to spend. So that's more than they typically have every year. It will be their highest revenue budget going forward and highest starting balance. One thing to note that is always a conversation as we get into forecasting is the kicker. As you know, kickers happen when an economist is off by more than 2%. We got a new state economist who's trying to lessen the impacts of kickers. But in the next year, we are still expecting to see a kicker, but it's also decreased in its impact. So it'll be about $90 million less than they they expected in March. So it'll be $1.64 billion back to the taxpayers and schools through the corporate kicker. Overall, Oregon's economy continues to grow, however, slower than it has been growing and slower than the national average. So we're seeing job creation lag behind the national average, GDP, gross domestic product, for those that don't want to speak a lot of finance words, lag behind, and our population growth is really slowing, and we're becoming more of an aging population. And both of these, the economist thinks, is going to lead to higher unemployment. Because we're not growing as fast. And then the last thing that I think a lot of people are always talking about right now, as we see a lot of different federal policies, the Congress is trying to figure out what they're going to replace the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act with. The Economist doesn't hypothesize on anything that's not current law. So they are tracking what's happening at the federal level. The biggest thing they did note is around tariff policies in Oregon, based on what's happening with the feds. And that's been changing day by day. So they can't get a good read on whether or not it will impact the state budget. But Oregon is a highly trade dependent state. And so we could be more impacted than some other states. So right now, we're okay. I will say during the forecast, a lot of legislators voiced a lot of uncertainty based on federal legislation that they're seeing drafts of. And I think this could lead to the legislature holding some money back in reserves to be able to better respond to anything that happens at the federal level. So there's definitely a lot of anxiety, but a lot of unknown stuff.
Going back to the top of when you were talking about, again, $500 million less than the previous forecast in March, but still above what we ended the session with and what we had predicted for surplus revenue at that time. What is the actual delta then? What's the actual point we're at that, not from the last forecast, but essentially end of session?
I will say, I think this biennial budget has about 12% more resources than the last biennial. So that's a good way to look at it. So still,
Okay.
there's no overall increase this time around.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Scott, let's bring you up next. Senate Bill.
Did I cut out?
You may have cut out.
She did.
What was
Yeah,
the last thing you heard me said?
12% above end of session budget from last year.
Yes. So
or from last session.
So compare biennium to biennium. So we're coming in with 12% more resources than last year.
Got it. Thank you. Scott, yeah, so 238, this is a drone bill establishing guidelines for public safety and law use or law enforcement use of drones.
Yeah, so thank you. Thanks, Jim. So this is a bill we weren't really necessarily expecting to bring up to the group because it came out of the Senate with an amendment off the floor, close to a unanimous vote. Came into the House with some momentum, but it's hung up. So I think we are going to need some city activity to help break this one loose. What the bill does is that it alters a bill that was passed in a law that was passed in 2013, and it expands the ability of public safety agencies to use drones in their efforts to protect the public. So right now, it's very difficult to use drones in a lot of emergency situations. They can't be used for the more routine calls. It's using them for search and rescue operations involves a lot of cumbersome administrative requirements. And essentially what this bill wants to do is streamline and sort of modernize the statute to reflect the utility of these devices. There are some things that would not be allowed under this bill, so we don't change any of the current restrictions on the ability of or the privacy protections, the prohibitions on recording protected activities such as, political, religious, anything involving, exercise of your civil rights, collecting that information. So we don't change any of those protections. We just allow these to be used in more situations, like if somebody calls the police and says, I think somebody's breaking into my house, they can deploy it. They could, under this bill, police could deploy a drone to survey that situation and help either discover that it's a raccoon or that there is a threat, and police can act accordingly. Importantly, it would also make it a lot easier for police to use these in terms to address and elude. So if you have a violent suspect and it's determined that the police do need to chase, which is something that's becoming increasingly rare, a drone can do that in a way that's much safer for the public. It's also a great way for officers to monitor a situation from a distance. Marion County Sheriff's Office told a story of how they had an individual who emotionally disturbed, had something that appeared to be a firearm. They were able to deploy a drone and determine that the person was actually holding an airsoft gun. And so they were able to resolve that without, which could have turned into a deadly force situation pretty easily. The hearing in the House side, some folks who had previously negotiated on the Senate showed up in opposition, and there was some new opposition from members concerned with just the nature of policing generally. The bill is, we'd like to get this bill out of Judiciary Committee. It's important to our public safety friends, both police and fire. And if you could see your way clear to call your House members and offer your support for this legislation, we'll circulate the one pager on it and some of our talking points. We're in negotiations right now on a further amendment, but we do need to demonstrate some support for this. It's a very cost-effective tool that's often used to de-escalate situations as opposed to the concerns that were raised in committee.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Scott. So I am up next, shifting to TRIP 2025. So last week when I gave you a fairly significant download and there was a bulletin article on more details, it was in the framework. The one thing I still don't have is actual language. However, we are still expecting to see some language. We also expect to see some hearings get scheduled this next week on the bill. So that's the best I can really offer at this point in time. I'll be curious to see the negotiations that have been taking place with the Joint Committee on Transportation to try to get some more refinement and more detail. I think part of the reason for some of the delay here will come down to, I think, wanting to get as many of those committee members comfortable with where the plan is. I think there again has been a fairly significant effort here to make this bipartisan. They definitely want to have that coming out of it. It's probably not going to satisfy some of the Republican leadership within the House because of where they believe the state should or shouldn't be spending any additional resources or creating additional revenue. But I think this still will present the league and counties with some significant funding over time. This still is going to be sticking to the core essentials of more of a back to the basics type of structure, and is certainly going to be well worth supporting going forward. I think even in times of some uncertainty, infrastructure investment's a good thing. It helps with those contracting jobs. It helps build up some of that core need that's out there in the communities. And honestly, the last thing we need to have happen is to wait for some additional time because costs are not coming down anytime soon. And further road degradation isn't getting any better without addressing it. So more details to come next week. Whatever details I do end up getting, I'm going to be shipping this out to certainly our Transportation Committee, as well as many of our partners around the table that we've continued to work with on transportation. So we'll be learning more about this in the next week. And again, appreciate everybody who's had some opportunity to engage with their local media with some tours and generating some of the op-ed support for that framework. That's going to continue to be really important, especially on this bill, because it's going to be a significant tax vote. And there's not going to be a whole lot of those moving forward in this final few weeks of session. So that's all I've got for you on the transportation piece. I'm going to bring Jenna back in here because we've got an update on one of our other priorities. This is the transient lodging tax flexibility, House Bill 3962. So Jenna, you're up.
Yeah, I wanted to say a big thank you because I wasn't here last week to all the cities who put in written testimony or submitted or showed up in person virtually to support the TLT bill in last Thursday's public hearing. The bill we're negotiating with the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association on the bill through this next week and hoping to continue to keep as much flexibility as possible on the table. What I need from you all is kind of like Scott's case with the drone bill, is to demonstrate more support for the bill across the wider membership of the House. So if you have a good relationship with your House member or want to build a relationship with your House member and you support TLT, if you could email them to get their support, that would be great. We have bipartisan sponsors on the bill, but I know it would be really great to get a couple more Republicans to support the bill. And then if you have a moderate Democrat in your district, then also getting them on board, because they seem to be more apt to support the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association. So get out there, talk to your representatives, ask them to support House Bill 3962 with the -2 amendment, and I'll update you guys next week on any new amendments that might be coming.
Great, thank you for that. One other thing I wanted to make sure folks knew too is we always want to drop some additional good news. Certainly where we're at on this transient lodging tax is a lot further than we have ever been in a legislative process. So that's all pointing at least in a positive direction, and hope we're going to be able to hold that. Scott, if you're still available, Senate Bill 179, this is the rec community bill. Where are we at with that? I'm not seeing Scott. I wanted to at least give this to him, but I'm not seeing him.
So Jim, the bill passed this House committee unanimously yesterday. It's on its way to the House floor, and Rep. Mannix is carrying it, and I just sent him his talking points. So all is well. I'm sure he'll stray. I'm sure he'll talk about the need to do a little bit more, which we all agree with. But hoping that that gets done. Also provided him with a floor letter to hand out in advance. That's the one with all our logos on it. So thanks everybody for your help.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy, for jumping in on this. And yeah, this has been a pretty wide coalition that's gone forward. A lot of recreation interests, obviously cities, and it's great to be able to get this past the final mark. And for anybody out there who still has really good relationships with folks, this is the time to engage one final moment to make sure that they vote the right way when it hits the floor. So thank you very much for that. So that really concludes our legislative update at this point in time. As we talked about this on the front end, happy to take any messages that you can drop into chat that we can get responses to, as well as taking this time to raise your hands and ask any other questions that might be coming up.
Jim, why don't we address this question from City of Fairview? Kind of a good housekeeping, sort of big picture question for a member who's looking to get contact information.
Okay. I'm not seeing it, Kevin, if you can.
You're not seeing it in the chat? So the question is, do you see it now?
Why don't you just go ahead and repeat it so I'm not missing something?
So they're looking, this is a member who's looking for contact information on how to show support for bills, particularly Scott's bill. I'm assuming This includes staff contact information, which I can drop into the chat here momentarily. And then I would think we want to also direct this particular member to the legislative website.
Yeah, so your best shot, I'm just going to drop the Legis website in there real quick. Everybody. So OLIS, which is the Oregon Legislative website, is really the best resource right now. It's relatively easy to navigate in there. You can pull up a physical bill, and then the bill will take you to wherever it's at in process effectively. So it may be in a committee, maybe heading to the floor, but for being able to submit comments and things of that nature, it provides a pretty solid ability to basically submit anything online or testify, sign up either in person or virtual. The other thing is if you've got specific questions on the bills that we're after, I always recommend if you've got questions, go straight to the bill or the lobbyist, whoever that portfolio is. So if you've got a question about Scott Winkle's bill here on the drones, go straight to him for it, and he can at least set you up with exactly who you need to talk to. What we try to do with our legislative alerts when those do go out, we give you a little bit more detail in terms of getting information on exactly what legislators we are targeting, what committees we're targeting, and the message points. So try to make this as easy as possible for you, but definitely if you've got some specific questions about some of those bills, easiest thing is to reach out to the portfolio manager over bills.
Okay, there's another question here about TLT. So we can bring Jenna back in. Other TLT bill moves. Are there any other TLT bills moving beyond 3962?
We have not necessarily heard confirmation. There are two state TLT bills that were heard on the same day as 3962. One that was related to county fairgrounds and one that is related to wildlife funding through the state TLT. And I have heard some rumors that that bill may go forward, but I haven't had anything confirmed. And that bill, the wildlife funding bill for the state TLT, is House Bill 2977.
All right. Here's a question from Redmond. 3883 requires governing bodies to allow public comment at the beginning of each meeting. Do you know if 3883 has any legs?
It's a good one for Scott.
Yeah, so I might need to unblur my background and write a flow chart on my whiteboard behind me to get through this one. But there is an intricate plan, and the 3883 may have legs, but not in its current form. And so there's work on amendments to that. There's some conversations ongoing with either that bill or another vehicle on using that bill for the open meetings reform. It's one of the potential bills. As written, it's not going to go. Our conversations with Representative Wallen, who's currently absent from the building for some health reasons right now, were very productive. She's quite reasonable, and I think we had gotten that language to a place where it wasn't really going to impact cities. I think that what we'd agreed on is there was some carve outs for meetings where it's not appropriate, but if it didn't appear that the language that we were proposing would have impacted best practices. The relating to clause is relating to open meetings, and so that was part of the negotiation process and the discussions we were having is folding that into there. We are looking to still get some of those open meeting reforms out this session, and we've been in talks sometimes heated with OGEC over the last week on what that language looks like. So there's hopefully there's more to come. We've also had to negotiate on some other bills on executive sessions as well, in order to break free, to keep the open meetings reforms alive. So I suspect I'll be speaking on that in more detail next week.
Thank you, Scott. Just glancing at chat here, Jim, not seeing anything new. So let's just hold on for a bit to see if anything pops up. I know we've been on some of these calls where you start to say, well, we're done with questions, and then that's a trigger for more questions. So we'll decide, there we go. See, look at that. Perfect example. Question from Sisters on the Condo Bill.
Yeah, that'll be Alexandra.
Condo defect liability reform, which is, let me double check my bill numbers really quick before I speak, because this is not one that I ever remember. Yes, so condo defect liability reform, HB 3746. This one has been through so many public hearings, so many public hearings. I believe it had 3 public hearings on the House side, and then it's had an additional 2 public hearings on the Senate side. That's a lot of public hearings. It is scheduled for a work session on Monday. I'm gonna double check, but I don't think there have been any amendments posted yet. I know that they've been in negotiations with the trial lawyers and with the like community associations, the HOAs. Unsure as to whether or not there are kind of any forthcoming amendments there, but it is scheduled for a public or for a work session. So we'll all keep our fingers crossed. Would really love to see that one get past the finish line. For those of you looking for kind of a way to help on that one, I will drop in the chat the list of legislators to target. It's in the Senate Committee on Housing. So it's a relatively small pool.
Very good. So we're at the bottom of the hour, just a little bit after 12:30. We're scheduled to go till 1, but we are in our question and answers portion. So we'll give this a few more minutes if folks have other questions that they want to drop into the chat, or if you want to raise your hand. I did, Jim, see a question earlier about education funding. Is that something you can provide some information about?
Yeah, I can hit on it a little. I mean, we don't have the day-to-day, advocacy on the education piece, but I can just say in general, once that final forecast came out from revenue, that gives us a better sense, or should give the education advocacy a better sense on what's available out there. I'll just say typically they want a lot more than what the governor's proposed and what the legislature's proposed, but I think there's still a sense out there that they can't give them everything that's available for other agencies or for other policy decisions that they're going to be making. I think the advocacy groups have been somewhere around 13 billion. I know Governor Kotek came in with something far less than that. It's probably around 11.4 at the front end of the session. And we're going to see, obviously, where those numbers meet up in the end. But that education funding, as it typically does, dictates what's available for everybody else. And that'll be a pretty tough decision at the end.
All right, Jim. Question from City of Milwaukee. There was a push last week on 4 childcare related bills. Any information?
That's out of our realm of what we work on. Ours is strictly, focused on those city core services.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we're going to put this one to bed. Appreciate everybody's time and attention this week, and of course, everything that you're doing to help our efforts for advocacy. Couple final reminders. We're going to be back here again next Friday at 12 noon, and that is expected to continue every Friday until the official or unofficial end of the session. A couple other housekeeping notes. Today's LOC bulletin is out, should be in your email inbox. Is more information there about other things that are happening in the Capitol, as well as several training opportunities that you might want to check out. And that is going to do it for this week. So we wish everyone a wonderful weekend. Thanks for all that you do for our communities, and we will see you next week.